At the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, Lieutenant Amanda Wilson was a figure who caught nobody's attention. Male soldiers ignored her. Commanders assigned her to unimportant duties. The 30-year-old petite woman's quiet demeanor and habit of always eating alone had earned her the nickname Invisible Lieutenant. No one knew she had served in a secret JSO sniper unit with the code name Ghost, had neutralized 47 confirmed high-value targets, and held a record for longest-distance shots. That is, until her unit was ambushed in Afghanistan's Coincidental Valley, and Amanda's shots from 800 meters away saved the lives of all 23 soldiers in her unit. Welcome to Best Honor Stories. Before we continue, tell us in the comments which city in the world you're watching this video from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button to help us preserve these valuable memories. The massive military installation at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, housed one of America's most elite military units, the 82nd Airborne Division. Here, soldiers from all across America trained before being deployed to the world's most challenging conflict zones. From early morning until late at night, military drills, physical training, and tactical education continued without interruption. In this intense environment, Lieutenant Amanda Wilson was almost invisible. The 30-year-old female officer was a small figure, standing 5'5" and weighing 120 pounds, athletic but petite. She always kept her light brown hair in a tight bun, wore minimal makeup, and carried her uniform impeccably. Her brown eyes rarely made direct contact during conversations, and her voice seldom rose above a murmur. She always sat alone in the base mess hall, typically choosing a corner table where she could observe the entire room while appearing to focus solely on her meal. She only spoke during meetings when directly asked. During morning runs, she stayed in the middle of the pack, neither at the front nor at the back. In shooting drills, she achieved average scores that kept her name off both the excellence and remedial training lists. In everything, she seemed to take care to remain exactly in the middle, as if trying not to draw attention. "Is Wilson in the file room again?" asked Captain Reynolds during a morning briefing as he looked around the Tactical Operations Center. "Why is that woman always dealing with paperwork instead of joining us?" "Women are better with paperwork, sir," muttered Sergeant Martinez, making those around him laugh. "Probably why the Pentagon sent her here, to organize our filing system." Indeed, Amanda was typically assigned to logistical tasks, inventory control, and other desk jobs, rather than tactical planning meetings. She never complained about this treatment. In fact, she never complained about anything. The nickname Invisible Lieutenant had emerged just a few months after she joined the unit. Some attributed it to her shyness, while others thought that despite being a West Point graduate, she lacked field experience. But no one knew her real story. No one bothered to ask why she sometimes stared into the distance during briefings about the Afghanistan theater, or why she occasionally traced her finger over certain mountain ranges on maps when she thought no one was watching. When it was announced that the division was preparing for a new mission in Afghanistan, Amanda quietly made her preparations as usual. Captain Reynolds, the unit commander, assigned her once again to the most passive role when distributing mission assignments, communication and logistics coordination at the base camp.
"Wilson, you'll stay at the base camp,"
said the captain during an evening briefing. "You'll handle the communications center and logistics flow. Try not to mess up the radio protocols this time." Amanda nodded, her face betraying no emotion. "Understood, sir." Sergeant Martinez rolled his eyes and whispered to the lieutenant next to him, "Why even bring her to Afghanistan if she's just going to sit at a desk? That slot could go to someone who can actually contribute in a firefight." 4 days later, a company from the 82nd Airborne Division arrived at a forward operating base near Afghanistan's Coincidental Valley, one of the country's most dangerous regions. Their mission was to assess Taliban presence in the area and provide support to local Afghan forces. The soldiers quickly established their routines, with Amanda setting up in the communications center, a small room filled with radio equipment, satellite phones, and computer terminals. She worked efficiently, establishing protocols and testing all systems before the first patrols were scheduled to depart. "Wilson, you stay here and maintain communications," said Captain Reynolds before leaving the base for the first major patrol operation. "Sergeant Davis will assist you." Amanda nodded quietly as usual. Yes, sir. I've established redundant communications pathways and tested all frequencies. You'll have constant contact. That same afternoon, Captain Reynolds and a 23-person patrol unit left the base to visit a small village in the valley. Their mission was to strengthen relations with the local population and gather intelligence about Taliban movements in the area. At the base camp, Amanda sat in the communications room monitoring radio traffic. She was examining regional maps on a military computer, occasionally taking notes in a small black notebook. Sergeant Davis noticed her unusual focus, but attributed it to first deployment nervousness. "First time in Afghanistan, Lieutenant?" he asked, trying to make conversation. "Yes," she replied without elaboration, her eyes never leaving the screen. It was a monotonous task until a panic-filled voice came over the radio at 3:45 p.m. "Base, this is Alpha Leader. We're under fire. I repeat, we're under heavy fire. Coordinates, Kilo 79342. Amanda immediately straightened up, her hand instinctively moving to the transmission button. The voice belonged to Captain Reynolds, his usually confident tone now tight with stress, and the sound of gunfire clearly audible in the background. "Alpha Leader, this is Base. Give me a situation report," she said in a professional tone that surprised Sergeant Davis with its calm authority. "We're under fire from 3 sides, at least 30-40 enemy combatants with heavy weapons. We have 2 wounded already. The village was a setup. Repeat, the village was a setup. Requesting urgent air support and extraction." Amanda quickly looked at the map. The specified coordinates were in a mountainous area near the village, exactly at a location where 3 ridge lines converged to form a natural kill box. She radioed the base commander immediately. "Commander Carter, Alpha Team has been ambushed. Estimated 30 to 40 hostiles. Fire coming from 3 directions. 2 casualties reported. They're requesting immediate air support and extraction." Within minutes, the base camp went into full alert. However, the nearest air support was engaged elsewhere and could arrive in an hour at the earliest. Another nearby patrol unit was redirected to assist, but they were at least 45 minutes away given the challenging terrain. As Amanda listened to the increasingly desperate radio communications, she realized the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The unit was pinned down in a depression with minimal cover, ammunition was running low, and the number of wounded had increased to 5, including the team's medic. "We're running out of time," she said quietly, almost to herself. Then, with sudden decision, she turned to Sergeant Davis. "Sergeant, go to the armory and bring me an M110 Essen sniper rifle." Davis looked at her in surprise. "Lieutenant." "Now, Sergeant," she said, her voice carrying an unmistakable tone of command that seemed completely at odds with the woman they'd known at Fort Bragg. "And bring 300 rounds of ammunition, a spotter scope, and the ghillie cover from locker C7. Davis hesitated for a moment. "Lieutenant Wilson, you don't have authorization to—" "Sergeant," she interrupted, her eyes now holding his with an intensity that made him step back involuntarily. "Those men have less than 30 minutes before they're overrun. The mission requires immediate action. That's my authorization. Move, now." Something in her voice, a core of steel that had never been evident before, propelled Davis into motion. When he returned, Amanda had already changed into her field uniform and begun preparing her equipment with a methodical efficiency that spoke of years of practice. "Lieutenant, what are you doing?" asked Davis, setting down the requested items. "This isn't protocol. Command hasn't authorized any." Amanda took the rifle and checked it with a professional motion that betrayed years of familiarity with the weapon. Her hands moved across the mechanism with practiced precision, each movement economical and purpose-driven. "Providing support, Sergeant," said Amanda, her voice now carrying a different cadence altogether. "Tell Commander Carter that there's a phantom protocol situation and that Ghost is active in the field. He won't understand what it means, but higher command will. You're in charge of communications until I return." "But, Lieutenant, you can't go alone. That's against every protocol we have. You're not even combat certified for this deployment yet." "I've been combat certified for longer than you've been in the service, Davis," she said without looking up as she loaded magazines with swift, practiced movements. "And some protocols exist that you aren't aware of." She now looked like a different person entirely. Her posture had transformed from the slightly hunched, unassuming stance they were accustomed to seeing into something altogether more dangerous, balanced, alert, and coiled with potential energy. "That's an order, Sergeant," she said in a definitive tone that left no room for argument. "Inform Commander Carter of the Phantom Protocol activation." Before Davis could protest further, Amanda had gathered her equipment and moved toward the door with a silent, efficient gait that seemed utterly at odds with the awkward, almost hesitant way she had always moved around the base. "Lieutenant Wilson," Davis called after her, a note of desperation in his voice. She paused at the doorway, looking back with eyes that now seemed to belong to a stranger. "Sergeant, I've been operating in the Korangal since before you finished basic training. Those men have 18 minutes before they're overrun and executed. Every second you delay me reduces their chances." Her voice softened slightly. "Trust me, this is what I do." Amanda moved through the challenging terrain of the Korangal Valley with a speed and confidence that would have astonished anyone who knew her from Fort Bragg. She was moving twice as fast as a standard soldier would be able to manage, her breathing controlled and her movements economical. About 20 minutes after leaving the base, she began to hear the intensifying sounds of combat. She climbed a strategic hill overlooking the engagement area, moving in a crouch to keep her silhouette below the ridgeline. At the top, she went prone, using natural vegetation for cover as she set up her position with practiced efficiency. She prepared her rifle with methodical precision, checking wind indicators, adjusting her scope, and settling into a shooting position that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. Her position now placed her approximately 800 meters away from the combat area, an extraordinary distance that would challenge even the most skilled military snipers. The scene below was chaotic and grim. The American patrol had been drawn into a carefully prepared ambush. They were pinned down behind a small rock formation that provided minimal cover, taking fire from 3 separate directions. Taliban fighters, at least 3 dozen, were positioned strategically on hills and behind rocks, maintaining a continuous barrage that kept the Americans from being able to maneuver or effectively return fire. Amanda surveyed the battlefield through her scope, her breathing slowing as she assessed the situation with clinical detachment. She identified the enemy positions, prioritized targets based on the weapons they carried and their tactical positioning, and calculated firing solutions for each. She took a deep breath, her mind performing complex calculations that accounted for distance, wind speed, humidity, temperature, and the Coriolis effect of the Earth's rotation. Then, in complete serenity, she pulled the trigger. 800 meters away, a Taliban fighter who appeared to be directing the others suddenly collapsed, his body going limp before his companions even registered the sound of the shot. The round had struck with pinpoint accuracy, traveling the equivalent of 8 football fields to find its mark. Before the enemy could react to the first casualty, Amanda had already reacquired, aimed, and fired again. A second Taliban fighter, this one operating a heavy machine gun that had been suppressing the American position, jerked backward as her bullet found its target with unerring precision. In the combat area, Captain Reynolds looked around in confusion as the pressure from one of the machine gun positions suddenly ceased. "What was that? Did air support arrive?" "No, sir," said a soldier next to him, squinting at the ridge lines around them. "Sniper fire, but we don't have a sniper with us." Amanda was systematically neutralizing the Taliban fighters with a speed and accuracy that would have seemed impossible to most military marksmen. Each shot, taken from at least 800 meters away, found its target with incredible precision despite the winds that swirled unpredictably through the valley. The enemy forces, suddenly facing an unseen threat that was decimating their carefully planned ambush, began to panic. Their coordinated fire began to falter as individual fighters sought cover or attempted to locate the source of the devastating counterattack. "Find where the fire is coming from," shouted a Taliban commander in Pashto, his voice carrying across the valley. But Amanda slightly changed her position after every few shots, shifting just enough to prevent anyone from triangulating her location based on sound or muzzle flash. Within 10 minutes of her first shot, the tide of battle had completely turned. What had been a well-executed ambush against American forces was now a chaotic retreat, as the Taliban fighters abandoned their positions. She had neutralized a total of 17 enemy fighters and forced the others to flee in disarray, completely disrupting what should have been an overwhelming victory for the Taliban forces. The American unit looked around in bewilderment as the incoming fire dwindled, and then ceased altogether. Men who had been certain they were living their final moments now cautiously raised their heads. "Alpha Team, this is Ghost," said a voice over the radio, calm and professional. "Area cleared of immediate threats. Prepare your wounded for movement. Proceed southeast along the dry creek bed. I'll rendezvous with you at checkpoint Echo 3. Captain Reynolds stared at the radio in astonishment. "Ghost, this is Alpha Leader. Identify yourself and your unit. Who authorized this intervention?" "Time is critical, Captain. You have 5 wounded men who need immediate evacuation. Move now." Reynolds gave his unit the order to move, and they began to advance in the indicated direction, carrying their wounded comrades with a renewed sense of urgency. About 15 minutes later, as they approached the designated checkpoint, a figure emerged from behind a rock formation. The person wore standard combat gear with additional camouflage elements, face partially obscured by paint, and a tactical scarf. An M1110 Sayas sniper rifle was held with comfortable familiarity across their chest. As they approached, the figure lowered the scarf, and Captain Reynolds felt his world tilt on its axis. "Wilson, was it you?" Amanda Wilson now appeared completely transformed from the person they had known at Fort Bragg. Gone was any trace of the hesitant, forgettable lieutenant who blended into the background. Her posture was perfectly balanced and alert, her gaze sharp and assessing as it constantly scanned their surroundings. She held the rifle with the unconscious ease of someone who had carried such a weapon for thousands of hours. "Check your wounded, Captain," said Amanda in an authoritative tone that bore no resemblance to her usual soft voice. "I've called in your position to base. Medical evacuation should be here in approximately 12 minutes. Reynolds stared at her, his mind struggling to reconcile the woman before him with the forgettable lieutenant he had consistently overlooked and underestimated. Where did you learn to?" he stammered, unable to form a coherent question from the dozens flooding his mind. "Secure your men first, questions later," Amanda replied, her attention already shifting to the ridgeline where she constantly scanned for threats. When they returned to the base, the entire camp was in a state of controlled chaos. Commander Carter had mobilized all resources upon receiving word of the ambush, and the sudden appearance of Amanda, armed with a sniper rifle and clearly responsible for the unit's survival, had created a wave of confusion and speculation that rippled through the ranks. Commander Carter called for a full briefing with all available officers once the wounded had been stabilized. As they gathered in the command center, the atmosphere was tense with unanswered questions. When Amanda entered, now back in her standard uniform but carrying herself with the unmistakable bearing of a seasoned operator, the room fell silent. "Colonel Mitchell has just arrived from Central Command to address the situation," Commander Carter said, gesturing to a stern-faced officer who had arrived by helicopter less than an hour before. Within 10 minutes of her first shot, the tide of battle had completely turned. What had been a well-executed ambush against American forces was now a chaotic retreat, as the Taliban fighters abandoned their positions. She had neutralized a total of 17 enemy fighters and forced the others to flee in disarray, completely disrupting what should have been an overwhelming victory for the Taliban forces. The American unit looked around in bewilderment as the incoming fire dwindled, and then ceased altogether. Men who had been certain they were living their final moments now cautiously raised their heads. "Alpha Team, this is Ghost," said a voice over the radio, calm and professional. "Area cleared of immediate threats. Prepare your wounded for movement. Proceed southeast along the dry creek bed. I'll rendezvous with you at checkpoint Echo 3. Captain Reynolds stared at the radio in astonishment. "Ghost, this is Alpha Leader. Identify yourself and your unit. Who authorized this intervention?" "Time is critical, Captain. You have 5 wounded men who need immediate evacuation. Move now." The colonel activated a display screen, and a series of images appeared that told a story none of them had imagined. Ghost has 47 confirmed eliminations of high-value targets across multiple theaters of operation. She holds the 3rd longest confirmed kill in U.S. military history at 1,473 meters. She has conducted operations in 14 countries, many of which I cannot name in this setting. 3 years ago, during a high-risk operation in Syria, Ghost's identity was compromised by enemy intelligence. To protect both her and the program, she was given a new identity and background and integrated into conventional forces. Her assignment to the 82nd Airborne was part of that cover, a place where she could maintain her skills while remaining out of sight. Captain Reynolds, still processing this revelation, spoke up. "Sir, with all due respect, why weren't we informed? We've treated her like a forgettable, unremarkable officer," Colonel Mitchell finished for him. "Exactly as intended, Captain. The most effective cover is one that no one questions or examines too closely." Today, the colonel continued, Lieutenant Wilson violated protocol by revealing her true capabilities. When faced with a choice between maintaining her cover and saving American lives, she chose the latter. That decision will have consequences for her future assignments, but I want to be clear about one thing. Her actions today saved 23 American soldiers who would otherwise have been lost. The room fell silent as the weight of that statement settled over them. Amanda stood at attention, her expression neutral, but there was a quiet dignity in her bearing that commanded respect. Later that evening, as Amanda packed her few personal belongings, there was a knock at her door. Colonel Mitchell entered, his expression somber. "The extraction team will be here at 0600, he said without preamble. "Headquarters is implementing full Phantom Protocol reassignment." Amanda nodded, having expected nothing less. "Where am I going this time?" "That will be determined in flight. New identity, new background, the works." As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "There's one other option on the table. Pentagon's offering a position at the sniper school. You'd be training the next generation, passing on what you know. It would mean coming in from the cold. No more covers, no more hiding who you are." For a moment something flickered across Amanda's face. Longing, perhaps, for a life where she didn't have to pretend to be less than she was. "I'll consider it," she said quietly. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, a black helicopter landed briefly at the base. Few saw the figure who boarded it, and within minutes, Lieutenant Amanda Wilson had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. 2 weeks later, at the Advanced Sniper School at Fort Benning, Georgia, a new instructor arrived to take charge of the elite training program. As the candidates assembled on the range for their first day, they found themselves facing a petite woman with light brown hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to evaluate and measure everything they did.